Welcome back, everyone, to Rambling Dan Rose Deep Dive Book Reviews. We're glad to have you with us. It seems like every day the news has another story about the U.S. and China. I mean, it's tough to keep up with all the twists and turns, but that's kind of why we're doing this deep dive. We want to really unpack what's going on between these two global giants. And for this one, we're diving into World on the Brink. It's by Dmitri Alperovitch and Garrett M. Graff. They lay out a pretty stark vision of what this rivalry could look like, but they also offer some paths forward for America. So let's jump right in.
Sounds good to me.
So the book starts with this really gripping scenario, a potential Chinese invasion of Taiwan.
Yeah, it's not just a theoretical discussion. They walk you through a simulated PLA operation. It's pretty intense.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was reading it, and they go into all this detail, like specific types of aircraft, landing ships, cyber attacks. They even talk about how the PLA plans to use social media to spread disinformation and sow chaos.
Right. It's all about speed and overwhelming force. They want to cripple Taiwan's defenses before they can even react.
And it makes you realize,
Yeah.
Taiwan's not just some little island. It's a major player on the global stage.
Oh, absolutely. And it's strategically vital for a whole bunch of reasons.
Like their location.
Right. Smack dab in the middle of some of the busiest shipping lanes in the world.
And then there's the whole semiconductor thing.
Yeah. Taiwan is basically the Silicon Valley of Asia. They produce the majority of the world's advanced microchips.
The brains behind our smartphones, computers, even military tech.
Exactly. So you can see why China would want to control that.
Which brings us to the silicon shield theory.
Right. The idea that China wouldn't dare invade Taiwan because they'd be cutting off their own supply of these essential chips.
It's like holding the global economy hostage. But the authors make a really interesting point. They argue that this silicon shield might be weaker than we think.
That's interesting.
Yeah, because while China currently relies on Taiwan for chips, they've been pouring resources into building up their own domestic chip industry.
So they're trying to reduce their dependence on Taiwan in the long run.
Exactly. It's a long game for them. And it means we can't just assume this silicon shield will always be there.
And if China feels confident enough in their own chip-making capabilities, well, then the risk of an invasion could go way up.
That's a scary thought.
Yeah.
And to really drive home how dangerous this situation could get, the authors bring up some historical parallels.
Oh, like what?
Well, they talk about the Korean War, how what started as a regional conflict quickly escalated into a full-blown war involving major powers. It's a reminder that these things can spiral out of control fast.
Yeah, and the potential consequences are huge.
So we've got this potential flashpoint in Taiwan, and it's clear that China's ambitions are growing. We hear a lot about their economic miracle, how they've lifted millions out of poverty.
Yeah, it's an incredible story.
But the authors argue that there's another side to this coin. They point out that China's facing some serious internal challenges.
Like what?
Well, for one, they've got this looming demographic crisis.
Oh, right. Their population is aging rapidly.
Exactly a side effect of their one-child policy. It means they've got a shrinking workforce.
Which could put a real drag on their economic growth.
And it's not just demographics. They've got rising debt levels, especially in their real estate market.
Which could lead to a financial crisis if things go south.
They're heavily dependent on imports for key resources, like oil and minerals.
Making them vulnerable to supply chain disruptions.
And their legal system it's heavily influenced by the Communist Party.
Which can make it tough for businesses to operate.
Especially foreign businesses. There's just a lot of uncertainty and risk.
I can see that.
And on top of all that, their relationship with the West is becoming more and more strained.
Limiting their access to key technologies and markets.
So they're facing some serious headwinds.
For sure.
But the question is, how should we frame this whole rivalry? Is it just strategic competition like we often hear? Or is it something bigger? Well, the authors argue that we're actually entering a new era of Cold War II.
Okay, so not just competition, but a full-blown Cold War.
Yeah, they think that term better captures the scope and intensity of this rivalry. But they also make it clear that this isn't a simple replay of the U.S.-Soviet Cold War.
So how is it different?
For one thing, we're way more economically intertwined with China than we ever were with the Soviet Union.
Right. Our supply chains are linked. We trade with each other constantly.
It's not a clear-cut us versus them situation. And unlike the Soviet Union, China's not trying to spread a global ideology.
Yeah, they're more focused on securing their own interests.
And becoming the dominant power in the region.
So this Cold War II is more about economic leverage, technological dominance, and geopolitical maneuvering.
Exactly. It's a different kind of game. And we need a new playbook to win it.
I'm all ears.
Well, that's what we're going to dig into next. We'll explore some of the strategies the authors recommend for America to navigate this new Cold War. And believe me, it gets pretty interesting.
Sounds like a plan.
Just briefly, we want to say thank you for listening to Rambling Dan Rose Deep Dive Book Reviews. Please remember to like and subscribe to support our channel. Thank you.
Okay, so we're talking new playbook for this Cold War too.
Right, because the old Cold War strategies,
Yeah.
they just don't quite fit this new landscape.
Yeah, it's a different kind of game. So what do they suggest?
Well, they lay out a bunch of concrete actions the U.S. could take, starting with something we've already touched on, microchips.
Right, those tiny little things that power pretty much everything these days.
Exactly, and we talked about how China's trying to break free from that silicon shield by building up their own chip-making industry.
So how do we stay ahead in that race?
Well, the book says the U.S. needs to invest heavily in domestic semiconductor manufacturing.
Basically bring chip making back home.
Exactly, and it's not just about building new factories. It's about attracting the best talent and technology.
Like companies like TSMC, the Taiwanese giants.
Yeah, if we could get them to build some of their cutting-edge factories here in the U.S., that would be huge.
Absolutely. But it's not just about making more chips. It's also about protecting the knowledge, the intellectual property behind them.
The book argues that we should actually prevent the sale of advanced chip-making equipment to China.
Whoa, hold on. Even the older, less advanced stuff?
Yeah. They make a pretty compelling case. They say that even those older technologies can be used to support China's military modernization.
I see their point. It's about denying them the tools they need to catch up.
Exactly. It would definitely shake things up in the global tech industry, but the authors believe it's necessary to maintain America's technological edge.
It's a bold move for sure.
It is, and it wouldn't be easy. But they pointed the example of ASML, that Dutch company that makes the most advanced lithography machines, essential for making those cutting-edge chips.
Oh yeah, I remember that case.
The U.S. successfully pressured the Netherlands to block ASML from selling those machines to China.
So it shows that coordinated action with our allies can work.
It does, but it also highlights how complex this whole thing is. We're not just dealing with China. We're dealing with a whole web of global relationships and dependencies.
Yeah, it's like a giant game of chess.
Okay, so microchips are one key area. But there's another resource battleground that's even more fundamental.
You talking about energy?
Well, sorta, but even more basic than that. I'm talking about critical minerals.
Oh, right. Those elements that go into everything, from smartphones to fighter jets.
Yeah, electric car batteries and wind turbines, the stuff that powers the modern world.
And the problem is, China has a stranglehold on a lot of these minerals.
They've been quietly securing their access to these resources for years.
Buying up mines and processing plants all over the world.
The authors point out how reliant the U.S. has become on China, especially for rare earth elements.
It's kind of scary when you think about it. We've offshored so much of our industrial capacity that we've basically made ourselves vulnerable.
And it's ironic if we're trying to transition to a green economy. But those green technologies, they rely on many of the same minerals that China controls.
Yeah, talk about a catch-22.
So what do we do about it?
Well, the book suggests a few things. First, invest heavily in domestic mining and processing. We actually have pretty significant reserves of these minerals here in the U.S., but we need to build up the capacity to extract and refine them.
So basically bring mining back home.
Yeah, and it's not just about digging stuff up. We need to develop more sustainable and environmentally responsible mining practices.
Right. It's got to be done the right way.
Absolutely. And the second thing they suggest is forging strategic partnerships with other countries that have these resources, countries that share our values and interests.
So building a more diverse and resilient supply chain?
Exactly. Reducing our reliance on China and strengthening our relationships with like-minded partners.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've talked about microchips and minerals, but there's another crucial ingredient in all of this. Talent.
Oh yeah, the brains behind the operation.
The authors make a really strong case for immigration as a key strength for America.
Right, we need to attract and retain the best and brightest from around the world.
But they argue that our current immigration system, it's actually holding us back.
It's like we're training people at our universities and then sending them off to start companies and innovate for our competitors.
It's crazy.
So they suggest some pretty big changes.
Like what?
Streamlining the visa process, making it easier for talented individuals to get green cards and become citizens.
Basically sending a message that America is open for business and open to the world's best and brightest.
Yeah. Yep, that's the idea.
Okay, so we've covered the physical resources and the human capital. But what about the technologies that are going to shape this Cold War too?
Yeah, that's where the book gets really futuristic.
It's like a sneak peek into the future of warfare economics, even everyday life.
And they identify a few key areas where the U.S. needs to focus its energy.
All right, let's dive in.
Okay, so first up, artificial intelligence, or AI.
The one everyone's talking about.
It's already changing our lives in so many ways.
But we're just getting started.
Exactly. The authors believe AI is going to revolutionize pretty much everything.
Healthcare, transportation, manufacturing.
Even warfare.
And they highlight how China is going all in on AI.
They're investing massive amounts of money. They've got access to huge data sets. And they're not as constrained by ethical concerns as we are in the West. But the authors also point out that the U.S. still has some key advantages.
Like what?
Well, we have a more open and innovative research environment, a stronger foundation in basic science, and a network of allies who share our values.
So it's not a lost cause.
Not at all.
But
But we need to step up our game.
invest in research, cultivate talent, and make sure we're setting the ethical and regulatory standards for this powerful technology.
Right. We can't let AI become a race to the bottom.
Okay, AI is mind-blowing enough.
Yeah.
But the book goes even further, into the realm of synthetic biology.
Oh, wow. Now that's some next level stuff.
Synthetic biology is about engineering biological systems to create new materials, medicines, even entirely new organisms.
It's got incredible potential, but also some serious ethical questions.
The authors talk about how synthetic biology could help us tackle climate change.
Or develop personalized medicine.
It's like science fiction come to life.
It is, but as they point out, we need to proceed with caution and make sure this technology is used for good.
Right. We need strong safeguards and ethical guidelines.
And that's where the U.S. can and should be a leader.
Shaping the development of synthetic biology responsibly.
Exactly.
Right, from AI and synthetic biology, let's blast off into space tech.
Space, the final frontier.
It's not just about planting flags anymore.
Space is becoming increasingly contested, and China is making some aggressive moves.
They're launching satellites, building their own space station. They even landed a rover on the far side of the moon.
They clearly see space as a strategic domain.
And they're right. The authors emphasize how important space is for communications, navigation, intelligence gathering, even military operations.
It's the ultimate high ground.
And the authors are concerned about some of the trends they're seeing.
Like the development of anti-satellite weapons.
And the potential for space to become a new battleground.
Yeah, it's not exactly the peaceful Star Trek future we were hoping for.
So what do they suggest we do?
Well, they urge the U.S. to invest heavily in space exploration and defense, develop new technologies and capabilities to maintain our leadership in this critical domain.
But they also acknowledge that some challenges in space, like space debris or planetary defense, require global cooperation.
We can't solve those problems alone.
Okay, so from the vastness of space, let's come back down to Earth and talk about another area where the U.S. and China are competing, green tech.
Right. Climate change is the defining challenge of our time, and China is investing heavily in green technologies.
Renewable energy electric vehicles. They're trying to position themselves as the global leader in this space.
Which could have huge economic and geopolitical implications.
But the authors see this as an opportunity for the U.S.
We've got a long history of innovation in energy and technology.
So they argue for a mix of government investment, private sector innovation, and international partnerships to accelerate the transition to a cleaner, more sustainable future.
It's not just about saving the planet. It's about economic competitiveness, national security, and global leadership.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. Microchips, minerals, talent, AI, synthetic biology, space tech, green tech.
There's a lot to take in.
It is, but the authors don't just leave us feeling overwhelmed. They offer a way forward, a roadmap for America to navigate this new Cold War.
So what's the key takeaway?
I think it's about being smarter, more strategic, about how we allocate our resources.
Both financial and intellectual.
We can't afford to get distracted by every little crisis. We need to prioritize our investments, focus on the long game, and be willing to make tough choices.
It's about playing to our strengths, leveraging our alliances, and staying true to our values.
And ultimately shaping the kind of future we want to see. We've been talking about all the things America could do. Like investing in tech, shoring up alliances, all that. But it feels like we're missing something. Like, what is it that China actually wants? What are they really after?
Well, that's where the book gets into some really interesting territory. The authors argue that China's leaders, especially Xi Jinping, they have a very different worldview than we do in the West.
Okay, so it's not just about becoming a superpower.
It's more than that. It's about reclaiming what they see as China's rightful place in the world.
So like a historical thing.
Yeah, they see it as restoring China's greatness after what they call the century of humiliation.
The century of humiliation.
Yeah, it refers to the period from the mid-1800s to the mid-1900s, when Western powers and Japan basically carved up China.
They took control of ports, forced unequal treaties on them.
Exactly. It was a time of exploitation and national humiliation.
And that's still a really sensitive topic for them.
Oh, absolutely. It's deeply ingrained in their national consciousness.
So they feel like they were wronged, and now they're trying to right those wrongs.
They see their current rise as a way to restore China's rightful place as the leading power in Asia.
And maybe even the world.
They believe the current global order, the one largely shaped by the U.S. after World War II, is outdated and needs to be reshaped.
To reflect their growing power.
Exactly. And their ambitions aren't limited to Asia.
So they're thinking globally.
Oh, yeah. They're investing heavily in Africa, Latin America, even Europe, building economic and political ties, offering loans, infrastructure projects. They're presenting their model of authoritarian capitalism as an alternative to Western democracy.
So it's more than just a rivalry for power. It's like a clash of civilizations, a battle of ideas.
That's a good way to put it. And the authors argue that we need to be clear-eyed about the challenge.
You can't just ignore it or hope it goes away.
No, they're playing the long game. They're thinking in terms of decades, even centuries.
It's kind of daunting, to be honest. Like, how do we even begin to compete with that?
Well, the authors offer a framework for thinking about America's response.
Okay.
They focus on 4 key areas: strength, alliances, values, and support.
Okay, let's break that down. What do they mean by strength?
Well, they argue that we need to invest more in our military, modernize our forces, particularly in areas like hypersonic weapons, cyber capabilities, and space-based assets.
So basically making sure we can deter Chinese aggression
Exactly.
and alliances.
That's about strengthening our relationships with key allies in the region, like Japan, South Korea, Australia, India.
Basically building a united front.
Right, showing China that we're not going to let them push us around.
Okay, and what about values?
Well, the authors believe that we need to be more proactive in promoting our values: democracy, freedom, human rights, rule of law. We need to counter China's propaganda and expose their human rights abuses.
So it's not just about military might, it's about winning the battle of ideas too.
Exactly.
And finally support.
That's about providing concrete assistance to countries that are resisting Chinese influence. It could be economic aid, military support, or just diplomatic backing.
So basically standing up for those who are standing up to China.
Right, sending a clear message that we've got their backs.
So it's a pretty comprehensive approach.
It is. It involves using all the tools at our disposal.
And they're optimistic that if we do all this,
Right.
we can actually come out on top.
Yeah, they believe that the U.S., with all its strengths and alliances, can still shape the future. But it's going to require leadership commitment and a clear-eyed understanding of the challenge.
Well, they've certainly given us a lot to think about.
It's a wake-up call for sure.
But it's also a call to action.
Yeah.
The authors are basically saying, hey, we've got the tools, we've got the resources, we've got the allies, now let's use them.
And make the future we want to see.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a good place to wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us on this journey into World on the Brink.
We hope you'll join us again for another informative deep dive review.